Hernán Cortés de Monroy y Pizarro, first Marquis of the Valley of Oaxaca, was a Spanish conquistador who led an expedition that caused the fall of the Aztec Empire and brought large portions of mainland Mexico under the rule of the King of Castile in the early 16th century. Cortés was part of the generation of Spanish colonizers who began the first phase of the Spanish colonization of the Americas. Born in Medellin, Spain, to a family of lesser nobility, Cortés chose to pursue a livelihood in the New World. He went to Hispaniola and later to Cuba, where he received an encomienda and for a short time became alcalde of the second Spanish town founded on the island. In 1519, he was elected captain of the third expedition to the mainland, an expedition which he partly funded. His enmity with the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, resulted in the recall of the expedition at the last moment, an order which Cortés ignored. Arriving on the continent, Cortés executed a successful strategy of allying with some indigenous people against others. He also used a native woman, Doña Marina, as an interpreter. She would later bear Cortés a son. When the governor of Cuba sent emissaries to arrest Cortés, he fought them and won, using the extra troops as reinforcements. Cortés wrote letters directly to the king asking to be acknowledged for his successes instead of punished for mutiny. After he overthrew the Aztec Empire, Cortés was awarded the title of Marqués del Valle de Oaxaca, while the more prestigious title of Viceroy was given to a high-ranking nobleman, Antonio de Mendoza. In 1541 Cortés returned to Spain, where he died peacefully but embittered, 6 years later. Because of the controversial undertakings of Cortés and the scarcity of reliable sources of information about him, it has become difficult to assert anything definitive about his personality and motivations. Early lionizing of the conquistadors did not encourage deep examination of Cortés. Later reconsideration of the conquistadors' character in the context of modern anti-colonial sentiment also did little to expand understanding of Cortés as an individual. As a result of these historical trends, descriptions of Cortés tend to be simplistic, and either damning or idealizing. Name: while he is often now referred to as Hernán or Hernando Cortés, in his time, he called himself Hernando or Fernando Cortés. The names Hernán, Hernando, and Fernando are all equally correct. The latter two were most commonly used during his lifetime, but the former shortened form has become common in both the Spanish and English languages in modern times, and is the name by which many people know him today. Early life: Cortés was born in 1485 in the town of Medellin, in modern-day Extremadura, Spain. His father, Martin Cortés de Monroy, born in 1449 to Rodrigo or Ruy Fernández de Monroy, and his wife Maria Cortés, was an infantry captain of distinguished ancestry but slender means. Hernán's mother was Catalina Pizarro Altamirano. Through his mother, Hernán was the second cousin once removed of Francisco Pizarro, who later conquered the Inca Empire of modern-day Peru. Through her parents Diego Altamirano and wife and cousin Leonor Sanchez Pizarro Altamirano, first cousin of Pizarro's father. Through his father, Hernán was a twice-distant relative of Nicolas de Ovando, the third governor of Hispaniola. His paternal grandfather was a son of Rodrigo de Monroy y Almaraz, fifth Lord of Monroy, and wife Mencia de Orellana y Carvajal. Hernán Cortés is described as a pale, sickly child by his biographer, chaplain, and friend Francisco López de Gomara. At the age of 14, Cortés was sent to study Latin under an uncle-in-law in Salamanca. After 2 years, Cortés, tired of schooling, returned home to Medellin, much to the irritation of his parents, who had hoped to see him equipped for a profitable legal career. However, those 2 years at Salamanca, plus his long period of training and experience as a notary, first in Seville and later in Hispaniola, would give him a close acquaintance with the legal codes of Castile that helped him to justify his unauthorized conquest of Mexico. At this point in his life, Cortés was described by Gomara as restless, haughty and mischievous. By this time, news of the exciting discoveries of Christopher Columbus Indiana the New World was streaming back to Spain. Early career in the New World. Plans were made for Cortés to sail to the Americas with a family acquaintance and distant relative, Nicolas de Ovando, the newly appointed governor of Hispaniola, but an injury he sustained while hurriedly escaping from the bedroom of a married woman from Medellin prevented him from making the journey. Instead, he spent the next year wandering the country, probably spending most of his time in the heady atmosphere of Spain's southern ports of Cadiz, Palos, Sanlúcar, and Seville, listening to the tales of those returning from the Indies, who told of discovery and conquest, gold, Indians, and strange unknown lands. He finally left for Hispaniola in 1504 where he became a colonist. Arrival: Cortés reached Hispaniola in a ship commanded by Alonso Quintero, who tried to deceive his superiors and reach the New World before them in order to secure personal advantages. Quintero's mutinous conduct may have served as a model for Cortés in his subsequent career. The history of the conquistadors is rife with accounts of rivalry, jockeying for positions, mutiny, and betrayal. Upon his arrival in 1504 in Santo Domingo, the capital of Hispaniola, the 18-year-old Cortés registered as a citizen, which entitled him to a building plot and land to farm. Soon afterwards, Nicolas de Ovando, still the governor, gave him an encomienda and made him a notary of the town of Azar de Compostela. His next 5 years seemed to help establish him in the colony. In 1506, Cortés took part in the conquest of Hispaniola and Cuba, receiving a large estate of land and Indian slaves for his efforts from the leader of the expedition. Cuba. In 1511, Cortés accompanied Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, an aide of the governor of Hispaniola, in his expedition to conquer Cuba. Velázquez was appointed as governor. At the age of 26, Cortés was made clerk to the treasurer with the responsibility of ensuring that the crown received the quinto, or customary 1/5 of the profits from the expedition. The governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, was so impressed with Cortés that he secured a high political position for him in the colony. He became secretary for Governor Velázquez. Cortés was twice appointed municipal magistrate of Santiago. In Cuba, Cortés became a man of substance with an encomienda to provide Indian labor for his mines and cattle. This new position of power also made him the new source of leadership, which opposing forces in the colony could then turn to. In 1514, Cortés led a group which demanded that more Indians be assigned to the settlers. As time went on, relations between Cortés and Governor Velázquez became strained. This began once news of Juan de Grijalva establishing a colony on the mainland where there was a bonanza of silver and gold reached Velázquez. It was decided to send him help. Cortés was appointed captain general of this new expedition in October 1518, but was advised to move fast before Velázquez changed his mind. With Cortés's experience as an administrator, knowledge gained from many failed expeditions, and his impeccable rhetoric, he was able to gather 6 ships and 300 men within a month. Predictably, Velázquez's jealousy exploded and decided to place the leadership of the expedition in other hands. However, Cortés quickly gathered more men and ships in other Cuban ports. Cortés also found time to become romantically involved with Catalina Charez, the sister-in-law of Governor Velázquez. Part of Velázquez's displeasure seems to have been based on a belief that Cortés was trifling with Catalina's affections. Cortés was temporarily distracted by one of Catalina's sisters but finally married Catalina, reluctantly, under pressure from Governor Velázquez. However, by doing so, he hoped to secure the goodwill of both her family and that of Velázquez. It was not until he had been almost 15 years in the Indies that Cortés began to look beyond his substantial status as mayor of the capital of Cuba and as a man of affairs in the thriving colony. He missed the first two expeditions, under the orders of Francisco Hernández de Córdoba and then Juan de Grijalva, sent by Diego Velázquez to Mexico in 1518. Conquest of Mexico. In 1518, Velázquez put Cortés in command of an expedition to explore and secure the interior of Mexico for colonization. At the last minute, due to the old argument between the two, Velázquez changed his mind and revoked Cortés's charter. He ignored the orders and, an act of open mutiny, went anyway in February 1519. He stopped in Trinidad, Cuba, to hire more soldiers and obtain more horses. Accompanied by about 11 ships, 500 men, 13 horses, and a small number of cannon, Cortés landed on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mayan territory. There he encountered Geronimo de Aguilar, a Spanish Franciscan priest who had survived a shipwreck followed by a period in captivity with the Maya. Before escaping, Aguilar had learned the Chontal Maya language and was able to translate for Cortés. In March 1519, Cortés formally claimed the land for the Spanish crown. Then he proceeded to Tabasco, where he met with resistance and won a battle against the natives. He received 20 young indigenous women from the vanquished natives, and he converted them all to Christianity. Among these women was La Malinka, his future mistress and mother of his son Martin. Malinka knew both the Nahuatl language and the Chontal Maya, thus enabling Cortés to communicate with the Aztecs through Aguilar. At San Juan de Ulúa on Easter Sunday 1519, Cortés met with Moctezuma I's Aztec Empire governors Tendal and Pitalpatoc. In July 1519, his men took over Veracruz. By this act, Cortés dismissed the authority of the governor of Cuba to place himself directly under the orders of King Charles. In order to eliminate any ideas of retreat, Cortés scuttled his ships. March on Tenochtitlan in Veracruz, he met some of the tributaries of the Aztecs and asked them to arrange a meeting with Moctezuma II, the Tlatoani of the Aztec Empire. Moctezuma repeatedly turned down the meeting, but Cortés was determined. Leaving 100 men in Veracruz, Cortés marched on Tenochtitlan in mid-August 1519, along with 600 soldiers, 15 horsemen, 15 cannons, and hundreds of indigenous carriers and warriors. On the way to Tenochtitlan, Cortés made alliances with indigenous peoples such as the Totonacs of Sempoala and the Nahuas of Tlaxcala. The Otomis initially, and then the Tlaxcalans fought the Spanish a series of 3 battles from the 2nd of September to the 5th of September, 1519, and at one point Diaz remarked, "They surrounded us on every side." After Cortés continued to release prisoners with messages of peace, and realizing the Spanish were enemies of Montezuma, Xicotencat the Elder, and Maxixcatzin, persuaded the Tlaxcalan war leader, Xicotencat the Younger, that it would be better to ally with the newcomers than to kill them. In October 1519, Cortés and his men, accompanied by about 1,000 Tlaxcalteca, marched to Cholula, the second largest city in central Mexico. Cortés, either in a premeditated effort to instill fear upon the Aztecs waiting for him at Tenochtitlan or wishing to make an example when he feared native treachery, massacred thousands of unarmed members of the nobility gathered at the central plaza, then partially burned the city. By the time he arrived in Tenochtitlan, the Spaniards had a large army. On November 8, 1519, they were peacefully received by Moctezuma II. Moctezuma deliberately let Cortés enter the Aztec capital, the island city of Tenochtitlan, hoping to get to know their weaknesses better and to crush them later. Moctezuma gave lavish gifts of gold to the Spaniards which, rather than placating them, excited their ambitions for plunder. In his letters to King Charles, Cortés claimed to have learned at this point that he was considered by the Aztecs to be either an emissary of the feathered serpent god Calcotl, or Calcotl himself, a belief which has been contested by a few modern historians. But quickly Cortés learned that several Spaniards on the coast had been killed by Aztecs while supporting the Totonacs. Ing decided to take Moctezuma as a hostage in his own palace, indirectly ruling Tenochtitlan through him. Meanwhile, Velázquez sent another expedition, led by Pánfilo de Narváez, to oppose Cortés, arriving in Mexico in April 1520 with 1,100 men. Cortés left 200 men in Tenochtitlan and took the rest to confront Narváez. He overcame Narváez, despite his numerical inferiority, and convinced the rest of Narváez's men to join him. In Mexico, one of Cortés's lieutenants, Pedro de Alvarado, committed the massacre in the Great Temple, triggering a local rebellion. Cortés speedily returned to Tenochtitlan. On July 1, 1520, Moctezuma was killed. Faced with a hostile population, Cortés decided to flee for Tlaxcala. During the Noche Triste, the Spaniards managed a narrow escape from Tenochtitlan across the Tlacopan Causeway, while their back guard was being massacred. Much of the treasure looted by Cortés was lost during this panicked escape from Tenochtitlan. Destruction of Tenochtitlan. After a battle in Otumba, they managed to reach Tlaxcala, having lost 870 men. With the assistance of their allies, Cortés's men finally prevailed with reinforcements arriving from Cuba. Cortés began a policy of attrition towards Tenochtitlan, cutting off supplies and subduing the Aztecs' allied cities. The siege of Tenochtitlan ended with Spanish victory and the destruction of the city. In January 1521, Cortés countered a conspiracy against him, headed by Antonio de Villafana, who was hanged for the offense. Finally, with the capture of Cuauhtémoc the Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan, on August 13, 1521, the Aztec Empire disappeared, and Cortés was able to claim it for Spain, thus renaming the city Mexico City. From 1521 to 1524, Cortés personally governed Mexico. Appointment to governorship of Mexico and internal dissensions. Many historical sources have conveyed an impression that Cortés was unjustly treated by the Spanish crown, and that he received nothing but ingratitude for his role in establishing New Spain. This picture is the one Cortés presents in his letters and in the later biography written by Francisco López de Gomara. However, there may be more to the picture than this. Cortés's own sense of accomplishment, entitlement, and vanity may have played a part in his deteriorating position with the king. Cortés personally was not ungenerously rewarded, but he speedily complained of insufficient compensation to himself and his comrades. Thinking himself beyond reach of restraint, he disobeyed many of the orders of the crown, and, what was more imprudent, said so in a letter to the emperor, dated October 15, 1524. In this letter Cortés, besides recalling in a rather abrupt manner that the conquest of Mexico was due to him alone, deliberately acknowledges his disobedience in terms which could not fail to create a most unfavorable impression. King Charles appointed Cortés as governor, captain general and chief justice of the newly conquered territory, dubbed New Spain of the Ocean Sea. But also, much to the dismay of Cortés, 4 royal officials were appointed at the same time to assist him in his governing, in effect, submitting him to close observation and administration. Cortés initiated the construction of Mexico City, destroying Aztec temples and buildings and then rebuilding on the Aztec ruins what soon became the most important European city in the Americas. Cortés managed the founding of new cities and appointed men to extend Spanish rule to all of New Spain, imposing the encomienda system in 1524. He reserved many encomiendas for himself and for his retinue, which they considered just rewards for their accomplishment in conquering central Mexico. However, later arrivals and members of factions antipathetic to Cortés complained of the favoritism that excluded him. In 1523, the Crown sent a military force under the command of Francisco de Garay to conquer and settle the northern part of Mexico, the region of Pánuco. This was another setback for Cortés, who mentioned this in his fourth letter to the king, in which he describes himself as the victim of a conspiracy by his arch-enemies Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, Diego Columbus and Bishop Fonseca, as well as Francisco Garay. The influence of Garay was effectively stopped by this appeal to the king, who sent out a decree forbidding Garay to interfere in the politics of New Spain, causing him to give up without a fight. Granted coat of arms by the king, 1525. Although Cortés had flouted the authority of Diego Velázquez in sailing to the mainland and then leading an expedition of conquest, Cortés's spectacular success was rewarded by the crown with a coat of arms, a mark of high honor, following the conqueror's request. The document granting the coat of arms summarizes Cortés's accomplishments in the conquest of Mexico. The proclamation of the king says in part, "We, respecting the many labors, dangers, and adventures which you underwent as stated above, and so that there might remain a perpetual memorial of you and your services, and that you and your descendants might be more fully honored, it is our will that besides your coat of arms of your lineage, which you may have and bear as your coat of arms, known and recognized, a shield." The grant specifies the iconography of the coat of arms, the central portion divided into quadrants. In the upper portion, there is a black eagle with two heads on a white field, which are the arms of the empire. Below that is a golden lion on a red field, in memory of the fact that you, the said Hernando Cortés, by your industry and effort brought matters to the state described above. The specificity of the other two quadrants is linked directly to Mexico, with one quadrant showing three crowns representing the three Aztec emperors of the conquest era, Moctezuma, Cuitlahuac, and Cuauhtémoc, and the other showing the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan.